I come from the north of England, a place called Manchester, quite away from the sea. And what my father wanted me to be was a builder, a construction engineer. Because during the Second World War, had a team of men, hundreds of men, building factories and airports. And his ambition at the end of the war is that we'd set up the master firm, etc., etc. And I loved mountaineering. So I used to go off at weekends and climb, well, they're not mountains, they're hills, rolling moorland. And I used to go off camping on my own at weekends. My father gradually realised that I was never going to be a great master builder with him, but he did have hammered into me standards of building. That's what was into me. And then, as far as the sea is concerned, there's some beautiful islands north of Scotland called the Isle of Skye. Now, many of you men will know about it, or many men know about it, because that's where Scotch malt whisky comes from. And I was rock climbing on the Coolin Mountains, and from the top of the rock face, I could see the fingers of the sea coming in. And I really did have a conversion. I decided what I wanted to do was to sail the ocean. So that was the beginning, really. Oh, and the other thing is that...
How old were you then?
17. Yeah, I did not want to go and be a builder with my father and have men dependent on me. I wanted to be solitary, wandering the mountains and going to the sea.
But you were also spending time, a lot of reading, you know, in Manchester Library, reading all sorts of things.
Yeah, well, I had to do my building studies. You know, I went to college, building college. And so I had to do my homework. And I went in this superb public library in Manchester. And I got tempted, not by the rather pretty librarians, but by the racks of books of people, chiefly Americans, who after the First World War and the Second World War, the Americans, Dwight Long, Slocum, of course, he was before them, about half a dozen Americans had sailed the oceans on their own and with a friend. And somehow it seeped into me. I wanted to sail the ocean.
But that's also when you found Eric the Bishop's book.
But yeah, I was 16. That's the base.
Going back to Manchester Library, the other books you found there was about junks and...
yeah, there was an Englishman who worked in China before the Second World War called Worcester. And he was mad about Chinese junks. And so he had beautiful models made, precise models made by Chinese builders. And then when the war started, the Japanese war, the Japanese, he buried them wrapped up in oilcloth. And when the war ended, he went back there and dug them up again. They're in the British Museum now. So he also fed ideas that Western people are not the only people who sail the ocean. So they had an open mind, and the ideas.
And of course, Haddon and Hornell, the books, they were there, weren't they?
Haddon and Hornell, that was another book
and
in the
library.
library.
And that's where your Polynesian aspect really comes in.
Yeah.
Because
so the books were there in the library.
Haddon and Hornell did their books on what was it called again? Boats of the Pacific or whatever.
Canoes of Oceania.
Canoes of Oceania. And they were made just before the war, 1936.
The book was published.
The books were published. Same time as Eric the Bishop was building his boat in Hawaii. He reckoned he saw some of the stuff too.
There's another point about those early years. It was post-war. And I was working, playing, talking, friends with young men 3 years older than me. And they had dropped by parachute at the famous Battle of Arnhem. I mean, you were American soldiers. So there was a whole generation of men just 2 or 3, 4 years older than me. And they'd faced death continuously. So doing anything adventurous didn't seem like that to them.
Well, the other thing, you met a lot of old I mean, once you decided you wanted to go to sea and do things as boats, you kind of put yourself through an apprenticeship by meeting other people.
Yeah, I think that's an essential thing. My father had hammered into me, you have to learn. So once I got these ideas, about 20, I went and worked at a major boat building company in Britain called Thornycroft's. And I went in and I said, I would like to work here. You know, old cheeky, I would like to work here. And they said, what can you do? So I told them, and they said, the only boat builders we have here are absolutely professional boat builders. And I ended up, and I said, I'll do anything, I just want to work here. And they took pity on me. They said, there's a job in the stores. And so I worked as a store hand in the store. Fantastic job, because I saw all the nuts, bolts, all the bits of a boat I had to hand out to people. So that was one thing to learn.
And they had models there, didn't they?
Pardon?
Boat models.
Oh, and yeah, I was told to clean up. This is beautifully clean. I was told to disappear and clean up stores like this that had not been cleaned for years. And there I found boat models. And so I could study the boat models. One of the boat models was something called the Hickson Sea Sledge, which was an American idea which re-emerged after the war in the kind of boats like the Boston Whaler. So really, I did very well there, and I raised some money, and I was off to build my first boat. And I went and I said, well, I'm leaving, sir. I'm going to go and do this. And they said, well, we're very sorry, James. We thought of taking you into the office. Anyhow, I went on. So there was all this. I was surrounded by information, and people would give me information.
And of course, there was still a lot of old bargemen and
other that's the other
sailors around that had sailed.
We had workboats in Britain called Thames barges, which are quite well known. They're about 70 to 90 foot long, and they have a huge spritsail. And men were still working them, one man and a boy, and they were carrying grain and stuff and rubbish from London out. And I went and got a job with a firm like that. So I worked on one of those for a few months. And indeed, to give me an attitude, it's not just experience on the sea. You need to meet people who work at it, and you pick up their attitude from them, yeah? And there was an old barge skipper there called Bob Eves, and he would take me on one side. Look here, boy, this is what you do. And I got a course from him. I also went out on a steam fishing trawler. You shovel the coal in, I didn't. And I was the lowest of the low, called a cookie deck learner. There was no one lower on the ship than me, and I was the butt of a lot of practical jokes. But these men, you know, they'd been through the war. Some of them had started off in sail. The moment they see you're interested, they give you that information. And that's what I advise young people to do today, is to go out, be prepared to work, and ask.
But on that trawler, you were out at sea, right in the Atlantic, weren't you?
Yes, yeah, it was on the far side of Ireland, on a place called the Porcupines. And I used to pray for a gale, and then we wouldn't have to work on the bloody nets. But that job ended. We pulled up a mine. When we broke the net open, called the cod end, there's the mine going dong dong like that. And stopped fishing. And we had to go back to port, 2 days back to port, where the Navy was waiting for us to do the thing. And well, the next part of the story is I went up to see a girlfriend who was an actress, and I missed the boat sailing the next time, so I lost that job. Now there was all these things, and I'm going back to young people, because we've got a lot of people in the cities and that nowadays. Get out there and do it.
Well,
Try.
The problem now is it's all this health and safety all the time. Everybody there's always safety. You can't go out without all the special kit that you should buy in the shops, and you've got to have money to do it. And you've got to, have all the electronics and communications, because it's not safe if you're out there if you can't ring your base every hour of the day. And in those days, you went out to sea. In those days, you went out to sea. You were on your own, and if something went
10 miles off land. That was it.
You
was
deal
out
with
in the
it.
ocean.
If you have a problem, you sort it out, and you rescue
sort it out.
yourself. You don't expect other people to come and rescue you. So the whole attitude has changed, I think.
Yeah. So from these working seamen, that's where I got my attitude towards the sea. A lot of them couldn't swim. If they went overboard, they were dead. They didn't have lifelines. They just knew they would be dead, and they hung on.
You put yourself through all that apprenticeship, with fishing boats, barges, whatever, boat building firms. But then you wanted to start building your own boat, didn't you? And what made you first build something, and how did you get to that?
At the time, boat building in Europe was a highly skilled profession. You did 7 years apprenticeship, and you were still at the bottom of the ladder. The boats they built were exquisite articles of craftsmanship, there's no doubt about it. But around this time, I had a girlfriend who was American. And actually, she was 12 years older than me. And she'd studied, apparently, at Bryn Mawr, Vassar, and then, or the other way around, and then she went on to Oxford to take a further degree in English literature. She ended up working for one of your top publishers as a publisher herself. While she was in Europe, like many American ladies, she had, shall we say, a certain fling with a wild European. This does happen and goes on. When she got back to America, of course, she realized that it just wouldn't work. But she sent me a book, and the book was called Boat Building in Your Own Backyard by an American called Fred Rabel. 1948 it was published. And that showed me.
Sam Rabel?
Yeah,
Fred?
Sam
yeah.
Rabel. And that book showed me that if you could handle a saw and a plane and a drill, you could build yourself a seaworthy boat.
Can I just interrupt there? You did also another apprenticeship. You worked for Bell Boat Building, didn't you?
Yeah.
And that they were doing more that style of boat building. Was that before or after?
No, it was after I got the boat. That's why I went there.
Yeah.
So what happened is that when the Europeans came to America, boat building was, and still is in Europe at that time, a highly skilled professional job. But you Americans, you became Americans, you had all these places all the way up to New York, Chesapeake Bay, and you started using the skills of a straightforward carpenter. Now the American sharpies and various boats like that, the traditional American flat-bottom sharpies, V-bottom sharpies, Garveys, and so on, were boats which were developed not with boat building skills, but with carpentering skills. And the books which tell you all about this, the history of America, is Howard Chappell, his great works, which I have at home, and later on I studied them. But it was the Americans who gave me the impotence through Fred Rabel, Sam Rabel, Fred Rabel, to realize I could do it. I could saw a straight line, I could plane a bevel, I could bore a hole. So the American influence on me starting design and building design was enormous, starting from that and going on to ship power.
Yeah, and then your first boat was really a design out of Rabel's boat. Book.
Yeah, the first design I built was 17 foot. I made it 17 foot. It was a 15 foot designed by Rabel. There was no plywood, there was no wood in those days, so I used plasterboard, compressed
Tub of hardboard.
hardboard. I got some wood, covered it with hardboard, and made a lug saw, and I did like many young men do. You learn to sail by banking off a sandbank over there and going to the next sandbank, plus all the background information I had. And then the next boat I decided to build, I got a ship's lifeboat, a 20-foot ship's lifeboat off the London docks for about 20 English pounds. And I turned it into a Chinese junk because I was interested in junk sails. I got the lifeboat sailed and put battens on. And I really got going with that boat.